Hey guys, today I'm gonna be reacting to a video that looks very interesting. It's called Why Did American Cars Fail in Europe? So I'm excited to learn more because I know next to nothing about cars in general. So I'm excited to get to the bottom of this. So let's check it out and subscribe, comment and like.
Why did American cars fail in Europe? Let's explore. I'm sure you're all aware by now that American cars and American manufacturers simply couldn't take off in Europe. No matter how much they tried, two of the big three simply couldn't get enough people interested in their cars. Why did
I have to say that I don't really know, I'm trying to think of famous American car brands, and I'm coming up short. Maybe Toyota. I think maybe that's Asian, because I think the most popular car brand names, at least for me, that I don't really know much about this, are pretty much all European. So I'm trying to think of Nissan. No, I think that's also Japanese. I don't know. I don't really know what sort of American car brands. Maybe Dodge. I don't know if that's actually a brand. I don't know. But let's continue.
did this happen? Well, the simple answer is they didn't do it properly. And that requires us to start with looking at the one automaker that did do it properly.
Okay.
Ford.
Oh, Ford
is, to all intents and purposes, an American automaker. However, when it came time to expand into the European market, Ford actually put a fair amount of thought into it. They did have a presence before that, but the Blue Oval's European outfit, aptly named Ford of Europe, was founded in 1967, merging the automaker's UK, Germany, and Ireland offshoots. That's the Republic of Ireland, by the way. In 1967, the first model to appear from this new merger was the original Transit, which would go on to become the literal face of vans in Europe, certainly the UK, and rightfully so. Ford of Europe continued to do the European expansion properly by opening production facilities all over Europe. Today, the European arm of Ford operates 7 manufacturing facilities on the continent, in the UK, Germany, Romania, Turkey, and Spain. Ford also did this whole thing right by developing and designing cars specifically for the European market. The Fiesta, although they tried to market it to North America, which failed miserably, went on to become such a huge success in Europe that they discontinued it last year. Nice! Yes, I'm also bitter about the Fiesta's discontinuation, but it really was hugely successful in Europe, and the same applied to one of the C-segment's darlings, the Focus. Ford's first crossover SUV specifically designed for Europe, the Kuga, also did and still is doing great, and the same could be said of their Europe-specific minivans, the C-Max, the S-Max, and the Galaxy, Galaxy spelled with a Y at the end, by the way, which all showed the continent that minivans don't have to be boring. So there we are, Ford of Europe did everything correctly as far as an expansion to Europe is concerned, which is why they're still very successful here. So what happened to the other two? Let's start with everybody's favorite manufacturer of totally reliable cars, trust me bro, General Motors. Like Ford, General Motors also had a pretty substantial presence in Europe by the latter half of the 20th century. They had acquired Opel fully by 1931, and then in 1990, they acquired Saab and managed to destroy them in just 20 years. Great job. 4 years prior, in 1986, GM also officially formed General Motors Europe, which relegated GM's operations in Europe to Opel, Vauxhall, and then Saab. Now we arrive at the early to mid-90s. This was the time when another, seemingly unrelated, but actually very relevant to the story, automaker was entering the European market. Daewoo. Daewoo cars started to trickle into Europe in the 90s with a focus on value for money. The Tico, based on the 80s Suzuki Alto, was a beats-taking-the-bus type of vehicle, but it sold like hotcakes, especially in former Yugoslavia. One above that was the Nexia, which was a small, Golf-ish sized hatchback, and you could have a sedan too. At the top sat the Espero, which wowed journalists at the time for offering a ton of equipment for basically no money. Continuing into the late 90s, Daewoo's Lanos, Nubira, Evanda, which was also known under 10 different other names, and the horribly ugly Takuma were all doing fine.
It's not ugly.
And then Daewoo went bankrupt and General Motors scooped them up in 2002. With General Motors now at the reins of Daewoo, they devised one of the stupidest, most befuddling strategies I've ever heard. General Motors founded Chevrolet Europe in 2005 in Switzerland with the promise that the Chevrolet brand would return to Europe. However, there was a problem. The real Chevrolet's lineup back then was entirely unsuitable for the European market. The Avalanche, the Impala, the Silverado, the Blazer, you get the idea. Big cars, even bigger engines, terrible gas mileage. None of these qualities are something that the average European buyer was looking for. So what did Chevy do? They rebranded Daewoo models from their Korean arm as Chevrolets and sold them in Europe. Yep, instead of doing the Ford thing and opening proper manufacturing facilities in Europe and designing cars Specifically for the European market, Chevy just crossed out the letters Daewoo and wrote Chevrolet in Sharpie. And hey presto, new car. This resulted in abominations like the Chevy Spark, the Aveo, the Lacetti, the Captiva, and my personal nut favorite, the Orlando. Sure, you could still buy the Corvette and the Camaro in Europe, but these were meant to be Chevy's volume sellers. I think that the only somewhat good car to come out of this whole Daewoo bullshit was the Cruze. They were in Macedonia volume sellers because Macedonia is a poor-ass third world country and people needed cheap cars. Eventually, Chevrolet withdrew from the European market in 2013. By that point, GM had already shuttered Saab due to their bankruptcy issues a few years prior, leaving Opel as the only presence General Motors had in Europe. Until Stellantis acquired Opel in 2017 and made them 15 times better, that is. So there we are, Chevrolet failed in Europe because the Chevrolets that most people were buying were just thinly disguised cheap Korean cars that were about as desirable as getting a sledgehammer to your face. That leaves us with the last remaining member of the big three, Chrysler. Originally, Chrysler had a decent presence in Europe thanks to the merger of Simca, Roots, and Barreiros. Apologies if I didn't pronounce that correctly. And eventually the PSA Group would continue selling Chrysler vehicles throughout the 80s badged as Talbots. Or at least I think so, that's all the sense I could make of the research I did online. It's a little complicated. So that technically means that Chrysler did the Europe presence thing properly at first. They rebadged various vehicles from the aforementioned brands, all of which were European, and sold them as Chryslers in Europe. That's fine. So what happened? Well, Chrysler was acquired by Daimler AG in 1998. Leading to the creation of Daimler Chrysler. This gave Chrysler money, which they would eventually burn completely, and Daimler was losing so much money on Chrysler that they would sell them again in 2007. However, this also gave Chrysler a channel to re-enter Europe once again. And they did. Now, as I mentioned up there, GM's big mistake was convincing Europeans that they're buying a Chevrolet when they were in fact buying a Daewoo.
Yeah, that's bad.
In other words, they plucked cheap cars from their Korean arm and sold them to Europeans. So what was Chrysler's big mistake? Chrysler's big mistake was not bothering with basically anything. The relaunch in Europe featured the compact Neon, the Stratus midsize sedan, and the Voyager minivan, or as you may know it, the Town & Country. Sure, the Voyager offered a diesel engine and a manual transmission because Europe, am I right? The Stratus, which was actually a Dodge vehicle by the way, was available with either a 4-cylinder or a V6 engine. Remember, midsize sedan in Europe in the 90s with no diesel power. Here's an interesting fact. The cops in Macedonia used the Stratus for the longest time as a patrol vehicle. And as far as I've heard, all but a few of them went memories up, and I'm pretty sure that nobody else except the police force actually bought them as civilian vehicles. Either that or they all exploded or destroyed themselves, I don't know. Chrysler's not bothering with basically anything continued well into the late 2000s. The widely hated Dodge Nitro was worse than other European SUVs in just about every way, and it was too big for Europe. The 300C, while it did receive a wagon version, which was just a Dodge Magnum with a front end swap, and a diesel engine from Mercedes, was still worse than the European competitors in just about every conceivable way. Chrysler even tried to sell the widely hated Sebring to European customers. Yes, that includes the convertible too. Again, these were all vehicles designed for the American market, and Chrysler simply brought them over and updated them slightly to meet European regulations. They were practically unchanged from their American counterparts. And that's a problem because it's a well-known fact that American and European car buyer tastes are vastly different. Oh, how could I forget? Chrysler also tried selling the PT Cruiser in Europe. That went about as well as you'd expect. The writing was on the wall. The 300C completely lost to the E-Class A6 and 5 Series, which is hilarious because the 300C of that time was based on the E-Class. The Stratus, meanwhile, lost out to stuff like the Passat, the Honda Accord, the Renault Laguna, the Audi A4, the Mercedes C-Class, and so on. The Jetta and every other C-segment sedans were running rings around the Sebring, and every other European minivan, the VW Charan, the Ford S-Max and Galaxy, yes, they were made by Ford of Europe, it counts, the Peugeot 807 and its siblings kick the Voyager's ass 10 times over. Eventually, Chrysler just completely lost its mind and decided to continue its presence in Europe in an entirely new and balls-to-the-wall way. The second generation Lancia Thema was the second generation Chrysler 300C with a few Lancia badges, and the Lancia Voyager was the same thing but for the later Town & Country. I also realized I completely forgot to write in the script that Lancia models were sold as Chryslers in the United Kingdom for no reason that I can think of. There probably is a reason, probably a weird, unusual reason either way. They did the long walk of shame back to North America, and eventually they wound up selling to Americans all of 2 cars, one of which recently went out of production. Nowadays,
No way.
Stellantis is focusing its efforts on other Mopar vehicles, and Chrysler is left with just a single model, the Pacifica minivan. But that one is pretty good from what I've read,
Really?
so that's
It doesn't
okay.
look
And
pretty.
those are the reasons why American cars in Europe failed. Thank you so much for watching this video, everyone. If you liked it, be sure to hit like and subscribe to the channel. If you have any other reasons for this that I don't know about, or that are difficult to find on the internet, let me know in the comments below. And I will see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.
Okay, this was very interesting. I think it's funny that, like, well, most of them, I think, like, not to say like almost all of them, like they did a poor job of like selling and marketing to Europe, which I'm a little shocked by, because like you're a car manufacturer, like shouldn't you like do your job properly? I don't know. Again, I don't really know anything about cars, but I think usually when you're introducing like not even just a car, like some sort of new product or a product to a different market that you are, you know, you have some experience in, like you should definitely do your market research and say like, okay, so what are the differences? What are the key differences that we should like change to and adapt, because you know this market is different to the one that we're selling, and they are looking for different things. I don't really know like which like specific things are like Europeans are looking for in comparison to the Americans. I think mostly from what I could gather is that I think in Europe, like the main differences, I think it's like the manual versus like automatic transmission. I think all cars in Europe, I'm pretty sure, I want to say all of them, but I'm not that sure, but I'm gonna say all of them are manual cars. Like I think automatic cars don't really sell that well, or are not even offered maybe. Like I think everyone just like drives a manual transmission. And I think in the United States it's more like, I don't know if 50-50, but probably like 60-30, even like, I don't know, 60-40. Like, I think people are more like, they are looking for automatic cars. Yes, of course, the manual cars are constantly like being sold, but I think it's more common to just see automatic cars, and people do actually prefer that. And I think in Europe, it's like the opposite. And as well as like the military, they mentioned like something about diesel. Like, I think they use like maybe diesel instead of like, I don't know, like gas. I think, or maybe you can like maybe switch. I don't know, maybe it's because diesel is cheaper. I think that's true. I think diesel is cheaper. It tends to be cheaper in Europe, and in the US, like everyone just uses like gas, or most people I think use gas. So I think those are like the main like two differences. But also I think it's more about like style and just what people are looking for when it comes to like a car. I think I'm not like, if I'm just, again, don't really know anything, but just, you know, from what I've seen and from what I've observed, I think in the US, I think it's more common that a lot of people are looking for like these giant like SUVs. Not obviously not all of them, not everyone in the US like wants a giant SUV, and it's not even practical in some places. But I think a lot of people, again, especially like in the South, and I think probably like around the Midwest as well, like people do really love their SUVs. Like they love those like gigantic trucks. They love their SUVs. And even up to a certain point, I think even minivans are very like famous as well. Like they're popular. A lot of people do look for them because they have like big families, and they want to like, obviously you need like a minivan, because I think it's the more like cliche popular car for like big families, I think. But also I think, I don't know, I think suburban minivans, or just, you know, they're associated with that, again, with the suburbs, and with, especially with American suburbs. I don't really know how popular they are in Europe. Actually, come to think about it, I think, yes, I think I've seen like I've seen minivans, but I think like smaller and more like compact cars tend to be like the norm, or they tend to be more popular in most places in Europe. I don't think people like, they're not looking for like gigantic SUVs, and they're definitely not looking for like minivans either. Again, that's just like my perspective, and I could be, again, totally wrong, but I think that's just me. So I would think, again, if I'm working on this, if I work for one of those like big manufacturers, well, I would obviously that's my theory, but I would test it and see like, okay, let's look at the numbers and see if I'm totally wrong about this, or if I'm right. And obviously if I'm wrong, well, okay, then yeah, let's sell them all the SUVs that you can think of. But no, if they prefer smaller and more like compact cars, like why would you try to sell them like cars that are not looking, like people in Europe are not looking for those kind of cars? So why would you try to sell them? Like, it's crazy to me that it's just like, it's a blunder of like of like such a stupid mistake, because it's not just like the reasoning behind, oh, why did they fail? It wasn't like this big like conspiracy theory, or it wasn't like this big like explanation, oh, was it like a number of factors that really did like influence this failure? It's like, no, it was like simpler mistakes that I think could have been avoided if people were just like given it a little bit more thought. Even if they had done that and maybe they failed, I would see like, okay, well, that would be the logic of why would they have failed? And if it hadn't been for that, it's like, okay, well, no, we sold them like the cars that they were looking for. So how come it wasn't successful? I think that would be okay. That would definitely warrant like this big study of like, okay, so how did we go wrong about this? But again, like the explanation is so simpler. It's so simply that it's like, come on, like wouldn't you have thought of this before? It's crazy that these big companies not even cross their minds. Like, let's just ask them what are Europeans actually looking for and what they want in a car. I don't know, that just seems like the basic explanation to me. So it's kind of crazy. But I want to know if the counterpart is true, and if the cars manufactured in Europe like tend to fail in the USA, because I think not really. I think cars tend to be like maybe more expensive. Like European cars tend to be more expensive over there. Maybe it's just me that I'm thinking of like the big and famous like European car brands, like Mercedes and probably like BMW. That's I'm pretty sure that's also European. But also like Volkswagen, like I know that's German, but I don't know like how. I think they tend to be like maybe a little bit cheaper in the USA. I don't know. I don't really. Again, I'm thinking I don't really know much about cars, but looking at this whole like when they were like mentioning car models, and just like by looking at them, I realized, oh no, I know a lot of these cars. Only that I don't really know them like at the top of my head. But when I look at the pictures, I'm like, oh, I know, I've seen that car and I've seen that one as well, and maybe I've heard of that car model before. So I'm like, maybe I'm not as clueless. Only that I know I've seen them. I just don't really know anything about them. Like their what brand are those, or like when, I don't know what sort of like specifics they have. Again, I don't really know, but I've seen them. I think they're popular, but I don't know, because it's me that I don't really know anything about cars. I've seen them and they're like, oh yes, I've seen, I know what they are. They ring a bell. Maybe they are more popular than most people think, because it's like, I recognize them. But it's funny. And also I think the one that really absolutely was like very crazy to me, I think it was the Chevrolet one, that just like, I think it was Chevrolet, like the ones that just like grabbed like South Korea, like South Korean like car like brand car models, and they just like didn't really did anything. They just like switched like the little thing, the little brand, and they just like were like, yes, we did this. It's like, that's crazy. Again, like, don't do that. Or maybe that's more common than I'm thinking. But again, that seems like a crazy thing to do, because people are going to be like, if I'm looking for a car, of course I'm going to be looking for the specific types of things that adapt to like my lifestyle. But I think probably like most people obviously want to know, like, yes, I want to know like about the engine and the mileage and whatever. But I think for most people, a lot of people, not all of them, but I think a lot of people, if they are looking for a specific car brand, like I'm looking for Chevrolet, I'm looking for Toyota, or I don't know, GM, like if I'm looking for a specific type of car brand, I'm gonna make sure, like, yes, they are actually like manufacturing this car, because otherwise, why would I go for that? I would just like switch, it's like, I don't know, it's like a phone. Like if I want a specific type of phone that, this brand makes, why would I get one that is just like, no, they just like, it's from the opposite like competitor. They just like stamped the little, they stamped like the logo in it. It's like, no, so why would I buy that? So that seems like, again, a crazy thing to do. And I think this whole video can be summarized by just big companies making insane decisions. I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but from my end, it looks like crazy that they managed to get away with it. And I think, sadly, I have to say, it's kind of like, I agree, like, why did they fail? Well, you explain it, and I have to say, I agree with, like, the failure. It's like, yeah, I can see why people were saying, like, no thanks, like, get out of here. We're gonna stay with our European brands, because it's like, yeah, at the end of the day, like, why would I go? Like, what different choice. Like, would I go for cars that are actually like made here and also they are catered to our specific needs, or like should I go for like either dodgy cars that you're just stamping the logo in, or just cars that don't really suit our needs because because of like the gas situation, they are like, again, they don't really fit anywhere, or whatever. It's like, why would I go for you? I would go again to the brands that actually cater to my specific needs. So sadly to say that they kind of deserved it. They failed and they kind of deserved it. But yeah, I want to know if like the opposite is true. If like in Europe, it's the opposite, like European car brands like also failed in the United States, which I'm guessing no, but I think probably American car brands are more famous in the United States, or maybe they're more popular. But I don't know if it's because they're cheaper or it's because of like it's a need thing. Like I don't really have the money to spend on like the big, like the really like fancy car that tends to be a European car, and I have to like settle for the US one. But yes, I would definitely love to know that. But that was it for today, and I'll see you soon. Bye.